Opening. The ghost at the window. It was a bitter winter afternoon when I made my way across the desolate moors to a solitary house known as Wuthering Heights. The path was muddy, the wind stung my face, and the house itself, a dark stone structure, stood like a monument to loneliness. As the door creaked open, a pair of wild dogs lunged at me, baring their teeth. They snarled as though they'd never seen a man before. Behind them stood a figure, silent, still, with eyes as sharp as broken glass. That was Heathcliff. He didn't greet me. He didn't smile. He simply stared, as if he had long since forgotten how to be among the living. That night, I stayed in one of the guest rooms. It was strangely damp. An old desk stood in the corner, and atop it lay a worn journal. I opened it. The name written over and over again. Catherine Earnshaw. Page after page, her handwriting trembled with longing. And then, a sudden thud at the window. Snow swirled outside. I thought I saw a face, and a voice, soft and broken, whispered through the glass.
"Let me in."
I froze. A pale hand rose from the darkness beyond the window, thin, trembling fingers scratching softly against the pane. I cried out in terror, but the name echoed once more, carried on the wind like a dying breath.
Catherine. Catherine.
This was no ordinary house. This was no place for the living. It was a house haunted not just by ghosts, but by love twisted into torment and sorrow that refused to die. I couldn't sleep that night. The storm outside raged on, and the memory of that pale hand at the window clung to me like mist. Who was Catherine Earnshaw? And who was the man called Heathcliff who lived like a ghost inside a house full of silence? To understand this place, to understand the sorrow in the wind, I had to go back to the beginning. Part 1. The Foundling Boy. Heathcliff had been taken in from the streets of Liverpool. A boy with no name, no home, dark-skinned, silent, and wild-eyed. Mr. Earnshaw brought him home like a stray creature to be raised among his own children. While the old man lived, Heathcliff was treated as a son. But after his death, everything changed. Hindley, the rightful heir, stripped Heathcliff of dignity and place. He was forced to labor, his hands calloused, his clothes ragged, his voice silenced. Yet Catherine Earnshaw, never turned away from him. They grew up together, chasing the wind, laughing in the rain, finding shelter only in each other. Words were not always needed. Their bond was something deeper, a fierce, unspoken understanding. To Heathcliff, Catherine was not just love, she was part of his soul. Down the hill, the world of Thrushcross Grange. Beyond the moors, past the wild heather and broken fences, there stood another house, Thrushcross Grange, home of the Lintons. Where Wuthering Heights was wind and thunder, the Grange was warm, orderly, and still. There, even emotions wore silk gloves. Discomfort was frowned upon. Love was whispered, not shouted. It was there that Catherine met Edgar Linton, a soft-spoken man with gentle hands and a gaze that held no storms. At first, Catherine laughed at him. His manners, his stillness, his well-pressed clothes. He seemed a world away from the chaos she had known. But the stillness of the Grange wrapped around her like a winter quilt, It quieted something inside her she didn't know had been screaming. There, for the first time, no one raised their voice. No one slammed doors. The fire crackled in comfort, not in desperation. One evening, she stood before the mirror. Her reflection looked like a lady, not the wild child of the moors, but someone polished, contained, respected.
Is this what it means,
She wondered.
living without being hunted by the wind?
She began to see herself split in two. One version of her still ran across the moors with Heathcliff, barefoot, breathless, burning. But the other, the one now standing in the mirror, was welcomed by society, wrapped in silk, and told she mattered. And Edgar offered a world she had never known, a world where she would be safe, valued, even cherished. One night, she whispered to her maid,
I will marry Edgar. It's the proper thing to do. But if Heathcliff were gone, I would be desolate, because I am Heathcliff. He is more myself than I am.
What she did not know was that Heathcliff had heard her. He had heard her love and her surrender. He did not confront her. He said nothing. He simply disappeared that night, into the storm. No one knew where he went. Only silence remained. And in that silence, the house began to freeze. This was the beginning. A love too wild for its own time, shattered by class, silence, and fear. The Moors would never forget it, and neither would we. Part 2. The Return of Heathcliff and the Shadow of Revenge. Years passed. Wuthering Heights stood silent as ever, its windows blackened with soot, its halls filled with echo and emptiness. Thrushcross Grange below the hills remained golden and calm, a house untouched by storms, its gardens in bloom, its servants quiet. And then, one day, on a road where no one expected a return, a man walked alone through the mist. It was Heathcliff, but he was no longer the servant boy, no longer the shadow in the corner. He wore a dark coat tailored to his form, his boots polished, his posture straight. He had wealth now. How or where he got it, no one knew. But he moved with the quiet power of a man who had never forgotten. His eyes, they were still the same, burning with memory, sharpened by pain. Heathcliff returned first to the house that had made him a ghost. There he found Hindley. The once proud heir, now drunk, reckless, his estate falling to ruin. Hindley had gambled his future away, and now Wuthering Heights was a shell of itself. Heathcliff did not yell. He did not threaten. He offered money, generous, silent money, to cover Hindley's debts. And in return, Hindley unknowingly handed over the house piece by piece, until it belonged to the very man he once enslaved. Heathcliff watched Hindley crumble, not with a sword, but with silence. He let the man drink himself into oblivion, and he waited. Catherine now lived at Thrushcross Grange. She had become a lady in every sense. Her steps were graceful, her voice measured. She wore fine gowns, spoke with elegance. But her eyes, they had grown still, as if a part of her had never returned from the moors. When she heard of Heathcliff's return, her heart did not race. It stopped. She went pale, her fingers trembling against the window glass.
He's come back?
And then they met. He stepped into the drawing room. The light flickered as if the house itself held its breath. Catherine rose. Before her stood a man forged by absence, refined in appearance, but wounded in soul.
You're really Heathcliff?
Yes,
He said quietly.
and you've not forgotten me.
Her breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes.
You disappeared. You left without a word, and now you return, like a storm in a calm sky.
He didn't move.
You lived,
He replied.
but not as yourself.
I survived,
She whispered.
but I was never whole.
A long silence fell between them. Then she said,
You broke me, Heathcliff. I can't live without you, but I can't live with you either.
Their hands never touched. No forgiveness passed between them. Just sorrow, shared, silent, sharp. Soon after, Heathcliff turned his attention to Thrushcross Grange. There he met Isabella Linton, Catherine's sister-in-law. Young, romantic, and dangerously naive, she saw in Heathcliff a mystery, a man wounded and brooding, ripe for redemption. She loved him, or thought she did. He pretended to return it. But to Heathcliff, Isabella was not a woman. She was a weapon. He eloped with her and took her to Wuthering Heights. There, she became a ghost. Her laughter disappeared. Her voice, once musical, turned into whispers.
He doesn't love me.
She wrote in a letter.
He never did. I was just a pawn in a game I didn't know I was playing.
Heathcliff watched her suffer but felt no pity. His heart had grown cold, not from nature, but from a wound he never let heal. The weight of it all crushed Catherine. Heathcliff's return, his sudden marriage, the dark stories swirling around Wuthering Heights. She stopped eating. She stopped smiling. She would stand by the window, looking toward the hills, as if expecting a shadow to rise over the skyline. Her body grew frail. Her spirit, even more so. Edgar, her husband, grew desperate. But there was nothing he could do. She was slipping, not just into illness, but into a place beyond reach. And Heathcliff? He stood by the window at Wuthering Heights, the wind howling around him. He had taken back the house. He had broken Hindley. He had stolen Isabella's future. But Catherine, she still slipped away from him. So he made a decision.
You took something from me, Catherine.
He whispered.
Now I will take what you leave behind.
Isabella would soon bear his son. Catherine was pregnant with a daughter. And so Heathcliff began to weave the next phase of his vengeance. Not against the living, but through the lives yet to be lived. He would bind the next generation in chains they didn't understand, and make them suffer the legacy of a love that burned too long. The moors were quiet, but beneath the silence, a storm had begun again, one that would not end in this lifetime. Part 3. Catherine's Death, and a Revenge That Would Not End. The wind still swept across the moors, howling through the heather, whipping around Wuthering Heights like a curse. Nothing had changed, and yet everything was different. Catherine grew weaker each day. She wandered the halls of Thrushcross Grange like a ghost, her body present, but her spirit drifting further away. She spoke in fragments, to no one in particular.
The sky, the wind, Heathcliff.
She refused food. She stared out windows for hours. The world within her no longer obeyed the rules of life or time. Edgar Linton tried everything. He sat beside her, read poetry aloud, held her hands with quiet desperation. But her soul was already on the moors. One night, Heathcliff came to see her. He entered without knocking, his boots muddy, his coat soaked in rain. Catherine lay propped up in bed, her skin pale as moonlight. She looked at him, and for a moment, the old fire returned to her eyes.
So, you came,
She said.
at last.
Heathcliff said nothing. He simply took her hand. It felt weightless, like paper.
You loved me,
She whispered.
and I tore you apart, but you did the same to me.
Tears welled in her eyes.
We ruined each other, and still, even now, I can't stop loving you.
He tried to speak, but no words came. He pressed her hand to his lips. It was cold.
Even if you leave me now,
She murmured.
I will not leave you. Not in death. Not ever.
And with one soft breath, her body stilled. They buried Catherine beneath 2 ancient trees, behind the chapel where wildflowers grew unchecked. There was no grand ceremony, no songs, just wind and silence. Heathcliff stood over her grave as twilight fell. The others left, but he remained. Kneeling in the dirt, he whispered to the stone.
You're gone, but I am still here. The space you left inside me devours me.
He clawed at the earth with bare hands, as if digging could return her, as if the ground itself owed him something.
Haunt me,
He cried.
Don't rest. I don't want peace. I want you. Return to me, even if it's as a ghost.
And from that night on, he believed she did. Time moved forward, but Heathcliff did not. He existed like a shadow in his own home. He spoke little. He ate less. His only comfort, revenge. From Isabella, he had a son, Linton, a frail, sickly boy who coughed in his crib and never smiled. From Catherine came young Cathy, a girl with fire in her voice and something wild in her eyes. Heathcliff watched them grow, not with love, but with calculation. They were his pieces now, living symbols of what had been taken from him.
You took my soul,
He muttered to the wind.
and now I will twist yours.
He arranged their lives like puzzle pieces. He planned marriages, inheritances, traps. He would bind Cathy and Linton together, force them into each other's arms, not for love, but for cruelty.
Blood follows blood,
He whispered.
and the sins of the past will be paid in full.
A house of shadows. Wuthering Heights became a graveyard before its time. The halls echoed with nothing but footsteps. Dust clung to every surface. Even the fires refused to burn brightly. Isabella had long since fled, leaving Linton behind. Hindley was dead. His life dissolved in whiskey and regret. Cathy grew in the grange, innocent at first, but soon drawn toward the storm. She met her cousin Linton and found him weak, selfish, and bitterly lonely. But Heathcliff pushed them together. He offered no kindness, only control. To him, they were not people. They were revenge written in flesh, but something strange began to happen. Heathcliff started walking at night, always toward the graveyard, always alone. He claimed he heard her voice, Catherine's voice, riding the wind, sometimes laughing, sometimes weeping.
You said you'd follow me into death, and still you keep me waiting.
He refused food. He refused sleep. and one day he simply vanished. They found him days later, lying beside Catherine's grave, his face turned upward, his eyes closed. He was not smiling, but he no longer looked in pain. For the first time in years, his body was still, and his soul, perhaps, no longer screaming. The wind blew gently across the moors, and in that hush, the story seemed to exhale. Years passed. I returned to Wuthering Heights once more. The house was quiet now, peaceful even. The moors still stretched out endlessly. But the anger had faded. I stood before the graves, 3 stones in the grass, side by side. Catherine, Heathcliff, and Edgar. I asked myself, how can something so violent, so broken, still be called love? I had no answer, only a wind that carried whispers I could never quite catch. I turned away, leaving the ghosts to their sleep. But even now, I still hear her name in the breeze. Closing. Wuthering Heights. Thank you for wandering with me through the wind-struck moors of Wuthering Heights. This was not a gentle love story. It was a storm, fierce, chaotic, and impossible to tame. Catherine and Heathcliff did not love as others do. They devoured each other. They belonged to each other so fully that even death could not untangle them. But their love was not peace. It was obsession. It was fire, burning through generations, leaving nothing untouched. In the end, we are left with a question. What is true love? Is it something that comforts or something that consumes? Perhaps the answer lies not in Catherine's final breath, nor in Heathcliff's hollow eyes, but in the silence of the moors, where sorrow and memory dance together in the wind. And yet, beneath all the ruin, all the grief, there was something painfully human, the longing to be seen, to be held, to belong completely, even in their madness, even in their cruelty. Catherine and Heathcliff loved with a truth that echoed louder than any vow. And maybe, just maybe, that's why their story endures. Because some love stories aren't meant to teach us anything. They're just meant to be felt. So now, as you close your eyes and drift into sleep, leave behind the sorrow and carry with you the haunting beauty of a love that defied time, death, and even reason. Good night, and may your dreams be gentler than theirs ever were.